Sarah stared at her phone, reading the messages in the group chat for the third time. Her friend's words felt like a lifeline, or so she thought. "Girl, you need to teach him a lesson." Melissa had typed, followed by a string of fire emojis. "Ignore him for a month. Men hate being ignored. He'll come crawling back," added Jennifer. "Trust us. We've all done it." "Works every time," confirmed Rachel. Sarah's husband, David, had forgotten their anniversary. Again. Not completely. He'd remembered at 11 p.m. and ordered flowers online, but they wouldn't arrive until the next day. It was the principle of the thing. 5 years of marriage, and she still felt like an afterthought in his busy schedule as a software engineer. She'd confronted him that evening. "Do you even care about us anymore?" David had looked up from his laptop, exhausted. "Sarah, I'm drowning in this project deadline. Can we talk about this tomorrow?" "I'm sorry about the anniversary." "I really am, but sorry wasn't enough anymore." The forgotten dates, the distracted conversations, the way he seemed married to his work rather than to her. It all came pouring out. David had simply nodded, said he understood she was upset, and returned to his code. That's when she'd texted her friends. Within minutes, they'd crafted a plan. Complete radio silence. No cooking for him, no asking about his day, no physical affection. She'd stay in the house, but she'd be a ghost. A month, they said, and he'd realize what he was losing. Men don't value what they have until it's gone, Melissa had concluded with the confidence of someone who'd been divorced twice. The next morning, Saturday, David woke up to find Sarah already up, sitting on the couch with her coffee, scrolling through her phone. He'd expected a continuation of last night's argument, maybe even hoped for it. Arguments could be resolved. Arguments meant communication. "Good morning," he said carefully. Sarah's thumb continued scrolling. She didn't look up. "Sarah, I thought we could talk today. Maybe go to that brunch place you like?" Nothing, not even a glance. David felt a cold sensation in his chest. He'd dealt with Sarah's anger before. Her passionate outbursts, her tears, her pointed silences that lasted a few hours. But this was different. Her face was blank, as if he weren't even there. He tried again. "I know I messed up. I want to make it right." Sarah stood up, walked past him to the bedroom, and closed the door. Not a slam. That would have acknowledged his existence. Just a soft, final click. David stood in the living room of their apartment, a space they'd decorated together, filled with photos of happier times. The silence was absolute. He'd experienced quiet before, the comfortable quiet of two people existing peacefully together. This wasn't that. This was erasure. Over the next few days, the pattern continued. Sarah moved through their home like he was invisible. She cooked meals for one. She watched TV with headphones on. She went to bed early and woke up before him. When he left notes, she threw them away unread. When he tried to apologize, she'd simply leave the room. David's confusion turned to hurt, then to something else. A clear, cold realization. He'd been willing to work on their problems, to communicate, to change. But this wasn't a request for change. This was punishment. This was control through cruelty. By day 5, David stopped trying. He began staying later at work, not because of the project, but because home no longer felt like home. He started meal prepping his own food, doing his own laundry separately, existing in parallel rather than together. Sarah noticed but told herself this was part of the process. He was supposed to feel uncomfortable. That was the point. Her friends kept encouraging her. "Stay strong. He's breaking. He'll crack soon." But as the first week turned into the second, Sarah started feeling a strange emptiness. She'd expected David to grovel, to beg, to fight for her attention. Instead, he'd simply adapted. What she didn't know was that David was making plans of his own, plans that didn't include waiting around to be punished for the rest of his life. 2 weeks into Sarah's silent treatment, something changed. She woke up on Monday morning to find David's side of the bed already made, perfectly made, with hospital corners she'd never seen him use before. His morning routine had always been rushed and chaotic. This precision was new. In the kitchen, she found a single note on the counter, not addressed to her, just a reminder to himself. Property viewing, 6 p.m. Her stomach twisted. Property viewing? Were they moving? He hadn't mentioned anything. But then again, she hadn't exactly been open to conversation. Sarah picked up her phone to text her friends but hesitated. For the first time since this began, a small voice in her head whispered that maybe, just maybe, she'd made a mistake. She silenced it quickly. No, he needed to learn. He needed to understand how much he'd hurt her. That evening, David came home at 9 p.m. He'd never stayed out that late without texting before, even during his busiest work weeks. Sarah was sitting in the living room pretending to read, but she'd been watching the clock since 6. Where had he been? He walked past her without a word, using her own tactic against her. He went straight to the bedroom and she heard the shower running. When he emerged, he packed a gym bag with clothes for the next day and set it by the door. Since when did he go to the gym before work? Sarah felt a flutter of panic. The script her friends had given her didn't include this. David was supposed to be desperate, not whatever this was. He seemed focused, purposeful, like a man executing a plan. Over the next few days, the changes multiplied. David started leaving earlier and coming home later. He'd always been clean, but now he was meticulous. His laundry done separately, his dishes washed immediately, his belongings organized with military precision. He'd hired a cleaning service for his half of the apartment, which felt like a slap in the face. He'd also changed his appearance. The shaggy hair he'd been too busy to cut was now styled professionally. He'd bought new clothes. She'd seen the shopping bags he'd brought home and immediately taken to his car. He was working out. She could see the difference in his shoulders, his posture. Sarah broke her silence once, unable to help herself. "Where are you going all dressed up?" David paused, looked at her as if surprised she could speak, and said simply, "Out." Then he left. The single word was worse than silence. It was dismissal. That night, Sarah texted the group chat. "He's barely home anymore. Is this normal? When do they start begging?" The responses were slower this time, less confident. "He's just trying to make you jealous. Hold strong," Jennifer typed. But even through text, Sarah could sense the uncertainty. What Sarah couldn't see was the full picture of David's life now. The property viewing had been for a sleek downtown apartment, a one-bedroom with floor-to-ceiling windows that he'd signed a lease for immediately. The gym sessions were real, but they were also time to think, to plan, to remember who he'd been before he'd spent years trying to make himself smaller to fit into someone else's emotional games. The new clothes were for interviews. Because David had done something else, he'd accepted a job offer from a competitor. Better pay, better hours, better respect. The offer had been sitting in his email for months, but he'd never seriously considered it, because Sarah loved their neighborhood. Her coffee shop 3 blocks away, her yoga studio downtown. But now he was thinking about what David wanted. At his new gym, he'd met people who didn't know him as Sarah's husband. He'd met Mark, a divorced accountant who'd invited him to play basketball. He'd met a whole group of people who'd welcomed him without baggage, without history. And yes, he'd met Claire, a project manager with an easy smile who'd asked him about his weekend and actually listened to the answer. Claire was everything uncomplicated. She laughed at his jokes. She asked follow-up questions. She didn't punish him for being human. They'd had coffee once just as friends, but David could feel that it could become more, and for the first time in years he wasn't sure he wanted to stop it. Back at home, Sarah's confidence was cracking. 3 weeks in, she'd expected victory. Instead, she felt like she was losing something she couldn't name. David wasn't fighting for her because David was done fighting. On Friday of the 3rd week, Sarah came home from work to find David packing boxes in the bedroom. Her heart stopped. "What are you doing?" she demanded. "Silence be damned." David looked up, his face neutral. "Moving. Moving where?" "We live here." "You live here," he corrected quietly. "I'm moving out. The lease is in your name. I've already spoken to the landlord. You can't just leave." David taped up a box with careful precision. "Sarah, you left 3 weeks ago. You just forgot to take your body with you." The words hit her like ice water. "I was trying to make you understand." "Understand what? That you'd rather punish me than talk to me? I understand perfectly." He picked up the box and carried it toward the door. "My lawyer will be in touch about the divorce papers." "Divorce?" Sarah's voice cracked. "Over a fight? Over one mistake?" David set down the box and finally looked at her. Really looked at her. "It's not about the anniversary, Sarah. It's about you choosing your friend's advice over our marriage. It's about you deciding that manipulation was better than conversation. It's about me realizing that I'd rather be alone than be treated like I'm invisible in my own home." He picked up the box again. You wanted to teach me about silence? Congratulations. I learned the lesson. The door closed behind him with a soft click, the same sound she'd made 3 weeks ago when this all started. Sarah stood alone in the apartment, her phone buzzing with messages from her friends. Asking how the plan was going, she didn't answer. For the first time in weeks, she had nothing to say. Sarah stared at the closed door for a full minute, her brain refusing to process what had just happened. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. David was supposed to break down, apologize profusely, promise to change. He wasn't supposed to leave. She grabbed her phone and called him. It rang once, twice, 3 times, then went to voicemail. His voice, calm, professional, invited her to leave a message. She hung up and called again. Same result. On the 3rd attempt, she heard a new message. You have reached a number that is no longer accepting calls from this contact. He'd blocked her, panic rising in her chest. Sarah called Jennifer. He's leaving. He said he's getting a divorce. What do I do? Wait, what? Already? That's not... Hold on, let me get the girls on the line. Within minutes, all 3 friends were on a conference call, and Sarah was crying so hard she could barely speak. Okay, calm down, Melissa said, though she sounded shaken herself. He's just trying to scare you. He'll be back. They always come back. He blocked my number, Sarah wailed. He packed boxes. He said his lawyer would contact me. There was a pause on the line. Look, Rachel said slowly. Maybe you should go over to where he's staying and talk to him. Face to face, he can't ignore you. I don't know where he's going. His parents' house? Jennifer suggested. His brother's place? Sarah called David's mother, her hands shaking. The conversation was brief and cold. David told us what happened. Sarah, I think it's best if you give him space. Mrs. Chen, please. I just need to know where. He's an adult making adult decisions. Respect them. Click. She'd never heard her mother-in-law sound so disappointed. The Chens had always been warm to her, had welcomed her into the family. Past tense. Had welcomed. The weekend was a blur of tears, phone calls, and desperation. Sarah tried David's work email, no response. She tried his best friend Jake. Sorry, Sarah, but I'm not getting in the middle of this. She even tried going to his office on Monday, but security informed her that David Chen no longer worked there. What do you mean he doesn't work here? He resigned 2 weeks ago, ma'am. Last day was Friday, 2 weeks ago, right in the middle of her silent treatment. He'd been planning this the entire time. Sarah drove around the city aimlessly, checking his usual spots, the coffee shop where he liked to work, the bookstore downtown, the park where they'd had their first date. Nothing. It was as if David had evaporated from her life. Back home, the apartment felt cavernous. She noticed things missing now. His gaming console, his favorite coffee mug, the photo of his grandmother he'd kept on his nightstand. He'd been taking things gradually, she realized, preparing. While she'd been playing games, he'd been plotting an exit strategy. Her friends kept texting, but their advice had become repetitive and useless. Give him time. He'll cool off. He's just hurt. Men always come back. But more and more, Sarah was realizing that David wasn't like the men her friends had dated. Melissa's exes had been controlling and jealous. They'd come back because they'd needed someone to dominate. Jennifer's boyfriend had been codependent, terrified of being alone. Rachel's husband had cheated, then begged forgiveness because his affair had fallen apart. David wasn't any of those things. David was gone. On Wednesday, a courier arrived with divorce papers. Sarah's hands trembled as she signed for the envelope. Inside was a petition for divorce citing irreconcilable differences and a separation agreement. David was asking for nothing. He'd divided their minimal shared assets exactly in half, down to the furniture. He'd even left her the car, taking only his paid-off sedan. There was a handwritten note paperclipped to the documents. Sarah, I've arranged for my things to be picked up this Saturday between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. Please don't be there. I think we've said everything we need to say or not say, as the case may be. I wish you well. I really do. But I can't be in a marriage where love is weaponized and silence is used as punishment. I deserve better. So do you, actually. I hope you figure that out. David, the words, I hope you figure that out, gutted her. Even now, even leaving, he was being kind. He wasn't cruel or vindictive. He was just done. That night, Sarah looked at herself in the mirror. Really looked. Her eyes were swollen from crying, her hair unwashed, her face drawn. When had she become this person? The person who took advice from friends whose relationships had all failed? The person who thought manipulation was an acceptable form of communication? She thought back to who she'd been when she and David first met. She'd been confident, direct, honest. If something bothered her, she said so. They'd had fights, sure, but they'd talked through them. When had she stopped trusting that approach? When had she started believing that games and tests were necessary? Her phone buzzed. The group chat, any update? Melissa asked. Sarah looked at the messages, hundreds of them over the past 3 weeks. Her friends discussing her marriage like it was a reality TV show, coaching her through strategies, celebrating small victories when David had looked tired or sad. She typed, "He's really leaving." Divorce papers came today. The responses were immediate. "Oh, honey, I'm so sorry." "What an asshole. You're better off without him." Seriously, who files for divorce over a little silent treatment? He's clearly unstable. Sarah stared at that last message. A little silent treatment? She'd refused to speak to her husband for 3 weeks. She'd treated him like he didn't exist. She'd chosen her friend's toxic game plan over her marriage vows. And now they were calling him unstable. For the first time in years, Sarah saw her friends clearly. Melissa, bitter from 2 divorces, who saw all men as enemies to be conquered. Jennifer, whose relationship advice came from Instagram influencers and pop psychology. Rachel, who'd stayed with a cheater because she was terrified of being alone, and now counseled everyone else to play hard to get. They didn't want her to have a good marriage. They wanted her to be as miserable as they were. Sarah left the group chat without responding. On Saturday, she left the apartment as requested. She drove to a cafe and sat with a coffee she didn't drink, watching the clock. At 2:30, she returned home. David's key was on the kitchen counter. The apartment was hollow now, his chair gone from the living room, his books removed from the shelves, his presence erased. On the counter was one thing he'd left behind, their wedding photo. They looked so happy, so young, so full of hope. Sarah picked up her phone and tried his number one more time, knowing it was blocked but needing to try anyway. The call didn't go through. The silence she'd created was now the silence she lived in, and it was deafening. 3 months passed like a slow-motion car crash. Sarah signed the divorce papers. What else could she do? David's lawyer had been professional and efficient, just like David himself. No drama, no fighting over assets, just a clean break that somehow hurt more than a messy one would have. She'd tried in those first weeks to find him. But David had been thorough. His social media accounts were deactivated. His phone number was changed. Even his LinkedIn profile was gone. It was as if he'd decided to erase not just their marriage, but his entire previous life. Through mutual acquaintances, Sarah learned scraps of information. David had taken a job at a tech company in the city, a senior position with a significant pay raise. He'd moved to a trendy neighborhood she'd always wanted to live in, but they could never afford. He was doing well, they said. Really well. Sarah, meanwhile, was falling apart. She'd started therapy, something she should have done years ago. Dr. Morrison, a woman in her 60s with kind eyes and zero tolerance for bullshit, had listened to Sarah's story and said something that hit like a freight train. "You didn't want to fix your marriage. You wanted to win an argument." "That's not true," Sarah had protested. "I loved him. Did you?" "Because love communicates. Love seeks understanding. Love doesn't punish." Dr. Morrison had leaned forward. "Sarah, what you did wasn't a relationship strategy. It was emotional abuse." The word abuse had made Sarah recoil. "I didn't hit him. I didn't scream at him. You weaponized silence. You withheld basic human acknowledgement for weeks. You treated your husband like he didn't exist in his own home." Dr. Morrison's voice was gentle but firm. "That is abuse, Sarah, and the fact that your friends encouraged it doesn't make it less so." Sarah had cried through the rest of that session and every session after. She was facing for the first time the reality of who she'd become. The therapy was painful, excavating years of learned behaviors, from her mother who'd used guilt and silent treatments to control her father, from her friends who viewed relationships as battles to be won, from social media, where toxic relationship advice was packaged as empowerment. One evening, 4 months after David left, Sarah ran into Jake at a grocery store. David's best friend since college, Jake had always been friendly to her. Now he looked uncomfortable. Sarah, hey. Hi, Jake. She hesitated, then asked the question she'd been dying to ask anyone who might know. How is he? Jake shifted his grocery basket. Sarah, I don't think, please. I'm not asking you to betray his confidence. I need to know he's okay. Something in Jake's expression softened. He's good. Really good, actually. New job is great. He's been traveling for work. Went to Japan last month for a conference, Singapore next month. He seems lighter, like a weight lifted. Each word was a knife. That's good. I'm glad he's happy. Are you? Jake asked, and there was no malice in it, just genuine curiosity. Yes, Sarah said, and meant it. I really am. I messed up, Jake, I know that now. I just wish I could tell him I'm sorry. Jake studied her for a moment. He knows. David's not the type to hold grudges. But Sarah? He's also not the type to give someone a second chance to hurt him. He's moved on. You should too. Has he? Sarah couldn't finish the question, but Jake understood. That's not my business to tell, Jake said, which was answer enough. Sarah nodded, thanked him, and left without finishing her shopping. That night, she allowed herself to imagine David's new life, the apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows she'd heard about from another acquaintance, his new job where people respected his time and expertise, the travel to places he'd always wanted to visit but they'd never gotten around to booking, and yes, probably someone new, someone who didn't play games, someone who said what they meant and meant what they said, someone who didn't need their friends to tell them how to communicate with their partner. Sarah opened her laptop and did something she hadn't dared to do before. She searched for David not on social media, but through his new company's website. There he was on their Our Team page, David Chen, Senior Solutions Architect. The photo was professional, recent. He looked good, more than good. He looked confident, successful, content. Next to his bio was a photo from a company event. David was there laughing, surrounded by colleagues. And next to him, with her hand casually on his shoulder, was a woman. Brunette, pretty, professional looking. The caption read, Team celebration for landing the Morrison account. Sarah stared at the photo for a long time. She didn't feel the jealous rage she might have expected. Instead, she felt a deep, profound sadness, not for what she'd lost, but for how she'd lost it. She closed the laptop and picked up her phone. Her friends, her former friends, had stopped texting after she'd left the group chat and stopped responding to their individual messages. She heard through the grapevine that they'd been talking about her, calling her ungrateful for not appreciating their advice. Let them talk. Sarah opened her journal, another thing Dr. Morrison had suggested, and began to write. I thought silence would make him value me. Instead, it taught him to live without me. I thought ignoring him would make him chase me. Instead, it showed him what peace felt like. I thought I was teaching him a lesson, but I was the one who needed to learn. David didn't need to change. He forgot an anniversary because he was overwhelmed with work. Something that happens in marriages, something we could have talked through. I turned one mistake into a campaign of cruelty because I was more interested in being right than being kind. My friends told me this would work because it had worked for them, except none of them are in healthy relationships. None of them are happy. They're bitter, controlling, manipulating, and I listened to them instead of listening to my husband. I don't blame David for leaving. I blame myself for giving him no choice. The silence I hear now, the unanswered calls, the blocked numbers, the absence where he used to be, this is the silence I created. This is what I built, brick by brick, day by day, for 3 weeks while he tried to save us and I played games. I taught him what silence really means, and now I'm the one learning the lesson. Sarah closed the journal and went to bed. Tomorrow she'd go to therapy again. She'd continue doing the work to understand herself, to heal, to become someone better. Not for David, she'd lost that chance, but for herself, and for whoever came next, if anyone ever did. Sarah sat in the coffee shop she'd discovered after the divorce, the one that had become her sanctuary. It was nothing like the trendy place near her old apartment. This one was quiet, filled with students and remote workers, people who minded their own business. She opened her laptop to review her notes for tonight's meeting. Sarah had become a volunteer facilitator for a support group, helping people recognize and heal from toxic relationship patterns. It wasn't therapy. She was careful about that boundary. but it was a space where people could share their stories and learn from each other's mistakes, including hers. "My name is Sarah, and 2 years ago I emotionally abused my husband," had become her opening line. The shock value was intentional. Too many people, especially women, didn't recognize emotional abuse when they perpetrated it because it didn't look like the violence they'd been taught to identify. Her phone buzzed. A text from Marcus, the man she'd been seeing for 6 months. He was a high school teacher, thoughtful and patient, someone who'd done his own therapy work before dating again. "Still on for dinner tomorrow. No pressure if you need to reschedule." That simple no pressure still caught her off guard sometimes. Marcus communicated like an adult. If something bothered him, he said so directly. If she did something hurtful, he expressed it calmly and gave her a chance to correct it. And she did the same. It was revolutionary, this basic respect. "Yes, looking forward to it," she typed back, then added, "Thank you for being patient with me." "Thank you for doing the work," he replied. Marcus knew about David. She'd told him everything on their third date. Figuring if her past scared him off, better to know sooner than later. He'd listened without judgment, then said something she'd never forget. "It takes courage to admit when you've been wrong. Most people never get there." Sarah's therapy with Dr. Morrison had ended after 18 months, but the lessons remained. She understood now that her mother's relationship patterns had infected her own. She understood that choosing friends who reinforced toxic behavior had been a way of avoiding accountability. She understood that social media advice about teaching men lessons and making them chase you was designed to generate engagement, not healthy relationships. Most importantly, she understood that David had done exactly what he should have done. He'd protected himself from someone who was hurting him. That wasn't cruelty. That was self-preservation. She'd heard updates about him occasionally. Jake had eventually warmed back up to her. Not friendship, but civil friendliness, and mentioned David in passing sometimes. He'd been promoted twice. He'd traveled to 14 countries for work and pleasure. He'd run a marathon, and yes, he'd gotten engaged. To Claire, the woman from his company. Sarah had seen the announcement in the professional newsletter the company sent out. They looked happy together. Genuinely, radiantly happy in a way that wasn't performed for social media but captured in a candid moment. Sarah had cried when she saw it, but they were different tears than before. She was crying for the life she'd destroyed, yes, but also for the growth that destruction had forced. She'd had to hit rock bottom to rebuild herself into someone worthy of healthy love. She'd sent a card to David's mother, not expecting a response. Just a simple note, "Mrs. Chen. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, and I'm not asking for it. I just wanted you to know that I've been in therapy, I've been learning, and I understand now how badly I hurt David. I'm sorry I caused pain to your son and to your family. I hope he's happy. He deserves to be." Sarah, to her surprise, Mrs. Chen had responded, "Sarah, thank you for your note. David is very happy and we're grateful for that. I hope you've found peace as well. We all make mistakes. What matters is what we learn from them. Take care." Linda Chen, it wasn't absolution, but it was closure of a sort. Sarah glanced at the time. An hour until her support group meeting. She pulled up the discussion topics she'd prepared. Tonight's theme, when teaching them a lesson teaches you instead. She'd share her story again. The silent treatment, the blocked number, the divorce papers, the complete erasure of her from David's life. She'd talk about how she thought she was in control, only to discover she'd been controlled by bad advice and worse impulses. But she'd also share the growth, the therapy, the hard work of examining herself, the slow process of becoming someone who communicated instead of manipulated, the joy of a relationship with Marcus where conflicts were resolved through conversation, not games, and she'd share the lesson she wished someone had taught her years ago. Silence in a relationship isn't powerful. Communication is powerful. Silence isn't strength. Vulnerability is strength. And punishing someone you claim to love isn't teaching them anything, except that you're not safe to love. As Sarah packed up her laptop, she saw a young woman at the next table typing furiously on her phone, occasionally looking up with a satisfied smirk. Sarah recognized that expression. She'd worn it herself once, thinking she was winning some game with her partner. She almost said something, almost warned her that whatever she was doing probably wasn't as clever as she thought, but she stayed quiet. Some lessons had to be learned the hard way. Sarah walked out into the cool evening air. Somewhere in this city, David was living his best life, engaged to a woman who probably told him directly when something bothered her, planning a future with someone who'd never dream of using silence as a weapon. Good for him. She meant that sincerely, and somewhere else, Sarah was building her own best life. One honest conversation, one healthy boundary, one moment of real communication at a time. The silence she'd created had taught her what she'd meant to teach David: that people can live without you. That leaving is sometimes the healthiest choice. That cruelty, even passive cruelty, has consequences. She'd learned the lesson and she'd never forget it.